Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Hey, welcome back to another episode. And this episode is actually very special because Ray actually interviews me, which I thought was a pretty cool concept because at the time of the recording, so this was recorded April of last year, so 2024, I was actually editing for a client, and one of her episode was actually one of her guests interviewing her. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a cool concept. And then shortly after that, Ray and I actually got connected on Threads, and she said she loved the concept of my podcast and what I'm doing. And then she actually offered if she could interview me on my podcast. And I was so excited for this because I was like, oh my gosh, again, I just saw this concept with a client and I was like, oh, that would be so cool. Because I've been interviewed before on other podcasts, but not on my own show. So this episode, like I'm so excited and so eager that I actually in the beginning you can hear me like speak over Ray. And Ray, I am so sorry about that, but I was just so excited and I'm so excited for you to hear this. And in this episode, I really go deep into why I started, and I do give a lot of background with my experience with immigration and my family. And honestly, like Ray did an amazing job interviewing me because she really did her homework. I mean, she's a podcaster herself, but she like had listened to a few episodes, took notes, and asked me specific questions about specific episodes, and I loved it. So, a little disclosures. Again, this episode was recorded April of last year. So I do mention in the episode that I've been doing this journey for 2 years now. And that was true at the time. However, next month, April 2025, will be the third anniversary of the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. And so I wanted to clarify that and also invite you to the first in-person event that I am hosting for the podcast. Yes, I am hosting an event about the podcast, and it's the first in-person event that I'm doing. I'm so scared, so nervous, but so excited to celebrate 3 years of this show, the journey that me and you have been on, listening to this podcast, listening to the guests and learning about people, and also to celebrate the award that the podcast won. So I would love to invite you to this event. It will be in Orlando, Florida. I did create a wait list that you can join right now. The link is in the show notes and show descriptions. And once all details are all set for location and everything, I will send an email to my waitlist first so they can know all the details. Okay. I will love, love, love to see you there at the event as a listener of the show. So come network, come hang out with me. And although I am so nervous and so scared to do this, because again, it is way outside my comfort zone. Like events, putting on events is not my thing, but God put it in my heart to do this. So I am stepping forward in faith and I know that He's going to take care of everything. So I want to see you there. I would love to see you there, to meet you in person, hang out with you, learn what resonates with you in this podcast, and even take some feedback. I would love to hear some feedback in person about like what could I do to make the show better, So join the wait list. I would love to see you there. And I'm so excited. So I hope you really enjoy this episode. I really hope you enjoy listening to more in depth about me and why I started this and more about my family and the journey that I've been on these past 3 years. Again, thank you so much for being here week after week, supporting me, supporting immigrant stories, supporting these the guests, and just thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ray, and I have the very great pleasure of interviewing Heidy De La Cruz on her podcast about her story. And my name is Ray, and I can't wait to get into it. So let's get started. Hi,
Thank you so
Heidi.
much for this. Oh my gosh. See, I'm already excited. I'm so excited about this.
Me too. I'm really excited. I've been very curious about your story. Um, I've
Oh,
really, I've really enjoyed the podcast episodes that I've listened to already. I love your style. I think you blend such fun and compassion like so effortlessly, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you as a listener. But so it's a real big honor for that I get to interview you and actually chat with you.
thank you so
So,
much.
yeah, for sure. And so, yeah, I love the concept behind your podcast. And um, I'd love to start off the episode by asking about why you became interested in the topic of immigration. I think I
Yeah.
heard, that you were born in the United States.
Mhm.
So, what made you curious about the journey of people immigrating to the United States?
So, as born in the United States, my parents came from the Dominican Republic, and my stepmom also came from the Dominican Republic. My husband came from the Dominican Republic. So, I am surrounded by immigrants, right? Like, so I know the immigration, well, part of the immigration journey, because I am learning a lot actually from my guests, but I know, my family's immigration stories and journey. And so I'm surrounded by immigrants. I have friends who are immigrants, my husband's friends who are immigrants and things like that. So I'm just surrounded. And so immigration has just always been a part of my life. It's just been a part of me. I did work briefly for an immigration law firm for a few months, and just the concept of that at that time DACA was really going on, so a lot of applications, so that was helping with that, with getting those applications going and things like that. So it intrigued me a little bit because it's just helping people be able to come to the country or stay in the country, fix their status, whatever the situation may be, right? And people who are looking for better opportunities, people who are fleeing, hardship in their own home country. So again, I've just always been involved and around immigration. But what started this podcast in itself was actually, I wasn't even going to start an immigration podcast, to be honest. I wanted to start a podcast, and I'll start with friends and family, interviewing the great things that God is doing in their life. And because I feel like even if we are just doing our day to day, we are actually still making an impact to those around us, even though we don't realize it, right? And so I was like, okay, I want to highlight, like, let me highlight my friends, let me highlight my family, and talk about what, they're doing in their life. However, I came across this article. So as I was researching the podcast, right, getting ideas, what am I going to name it, who I'm going to start talking to, and things like that. So as I'm researching, I come across this article on Medium, where I am a writer at, and she was an immigrant from Kenya. And that particular essay was about the cultural shocks she experienced in the United States and how each one just like really diminished her confidence, right? Whether
Mm,
it was people not wanting to try to listen to her or understand her because of her accent, or because of the food, like she couldn't find, food from home, different things. And I was just like, that really struck me, because I was
mhm,
like, unfortunately, the light that immigration has is very negative. And those who have, bigger platform, the news, the media, they all have strong influences. Like, it's just a negative concept that is out there about immigration. Facts are not really provided. The actual process, depending on what visa or whatever situation the person is not really provided. That's not talked about. And so that article really, really struck me. And I was like, man, like, I've heard my family stories, right?
yeah.
But I haven't heard really other immigrant stories. Well, stories about immigration, because we all have different parts of our stories, right? But that particular part, like, of immigration, I was like, I haven't really heard it. It's not really out there. So after I read the article, as always, I go out to my husband and I talk to him, and I was like, hey, like, I just read this article, and I was like, hey, you came when you were 9. Do you remember like when you guys got here? And it was him, his two older siblings, his mom and dad, right? And he was like very vividly, I remember that day, and he's like explaining to me details how he felt, what they ate, and it was just very detailed, for something like that, so impactful for a 9-year-old, right, to still
Yeah.
remember it. So as he's telling me his story of just coming to the United States, like, that day, I was like, okay, this is what I want my podcast to be. I was like, you're just listening to your story, right? There is a podcast episode in itself. So I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to highlight immigrant stories. And I was like, I don't want to get into the politics of it. I
Mm.
don't want to get into the messiness. We are going to talk about the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because depending, on where the immigrants come from, depending on why they're coming, their stories can go good or bad,
Yeah.
right? And so I was like, okay, this is what it's going to be about. And he was like, that's a great idea. So then we started brainstorming names. And I know the name is really long, but I really wanted to capture what it's about, the American dream, but in the eyes of the immigrants, right? Not as the native borns of the immigrants. Like, why do they come here? They come for that American dream that's been sold and told from the beginning of this country's from the beginning of this country's making, right? That American dream of the freedom and the opportunities and things. So that was a really, really long answer, but that is why how this podcast came about. And so again, I was like, I can start with friends and family because again, I have a bunch of immigrants around me. So it was really cool to like sit down, ask, family members if they were willing to share their stories. So I started with my cousin, which was the very first episode we actually talked about before we started recording. I started with my cousin, and then from my friend to my stepmom to my neighbor, and yeah, it's just been such an incredible journey for 2 years now. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there's something that I think I heard you say in different places. I can't remember what it is, but it's like second generation immigrants or something like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
And I think that's such a brilliant like phrase to
Yeah.
explain, people who are born in the country, but, have parents who are immigrants because I kind
Yeah.
of yeah, and so I was like, that is such a brilliant phrase, and I'm gonna have to borrow that from you. But speaking about your cousin, who you had on as your first guest, uh, you talked about each of the school systems,
Yes.
which is what my podcast is about, right? About
Yes.
education systems. And so I think that's what made me want to listen to it.
Oh,
And I thought it was really fascinating because you asked Carla like what she thought was different about the Dominican Republic than in the States, and you guys kind of went back and forth. And she talked about like the family and the upbringing, but the way that you phrased the question made me wonder if you studied abroad anywhere, or have experience living or studying in another country.
yes, I did actually live in the Dominican Republic for, I think my parents told me a year or a year and a half.
Mm,
So, yes, I did go, I think it was preschool or kindergarten, because again, I'm not sure like what grade they start, but I do know they do start younger than what they do here in the United States. So,
mm,
let's say our preschool, right? That's what I went to over there. So, I do remember, getting up, putting on my uniform, going to school, and I want to say it was like for half a day again, because, I was
mm,
really young. So, yes, I did go. So, I have very few, like very little memories, but I remember my mom picking me up, but then like she wanted to like take pictures of like me in the classroom, me with the teachers and some of my classmates and things like that. And I remember being excited to show her the kitchen, like the little play kitchen area. So I was like, look, mom. And there's a picture of me like pretending to be cooking. So I remember that. So I did go 1 year, but just listening also to like my cousin's story of like when she went to school out there, because she did. So it's her and her sister that both studied in the US and in the Dominican Republic. So the one that I interviewed, I believe she did yeah, she did high school out there, but middle school here. So that's
mm,
why I was like, I wanted her to compare both. And then her sister, who's younger than her, did elementary over there. And so, yeah, just comparing that system, because I've had heard, stories from them, but then stories from like other family members, and just how like instead of like the students switching classes like we do in middle school and high school here, it's actually the teachers. So the
Oh,
students stay
yeah.
in one classroom, and then the teachers are the ones that rotate through the classrooms. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. So I really wanted to get into like those details of middle school and high school, and just like also like the different classes that they take. Because I remember I had asked them like, what do they feel that the American public school system is better than the Dominican? Well, it would have to be the Dominican private, because public
Mm,
schools over there are kind of like poverty level, right? So a
mm,
lot of people go to private schools, if obviously if they can afford it. So they went to private school. And so I was asking like, what education system did they feel like was better? This was, before recording, and they were just telling me like it has different like pros and cons like everything. So they were just saying how like the American education system has a lot of extracurricular activities that
mm.
they don't in the Dominican Republic. And
Yeah.
so like, sports, different clubs and things like that. And so they thought that, that was good. But then like there's others, like there's other things that like the Dominican Republic like really talks about their history and world history, like
Mm.
and things like that. So it's just, pros and cons to everything. So I thought it was really cool to like dive deep into the differences.
Yeah, and I think Carla even talked about how like, it's like the focus in DR is more like family oriented.
Oh yes.
And so I was like, oh, so intrigued. And I wanted to know more. And so, the reason I asked that question is because what I really love about your podcast, and the reason why I make an effort on my own podcast to interview guests who have experience living in multiple countries is because you have that ability to cross reference. And it's not until you've been in a new environment that you have that analytical ability to analyze your own system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I was like, I'm pretty sure that Heidi has, I mean, I think you kind of mentioned it, but I wasn't 100% sure if you had lived there or if you had just visited.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so I was like, I'm pretty sure she has that, like, dual lens. And so I wanted to confirm. And so, like, I wasn't alive yet when, my mother immigrated to the United States because I was born there. But, from the stories that I heard and the experiences that we had, I felt like my mother was always in survival mode. Like nothing was not a challenge. Like language barriers and cultural differences, racism, lack of resources. There were like just so many systemic challenges that, made it clear that we had very little social power in the country. And you were talking about this earlier. And I'm curious, like, what are some stories of struggles that the guests on your podcast have had to face and endure either before moving to the United States or while immigrating to the United States? And I know you mentioned like no politics, none of that like stuff, but I kind of heard like people going into certain
Yeah.
details about these things. And so I was curious, like, what stuck out to you? What do you remember from the stories?
Wow. I have my guests just share whatever they're comfortable. So sometimes I will have a pre-show meeting with them so we can discuss and talk a little bit. And sometimes, and no, the majority of times I send them questions before just so they are, aware of what we're going to talk about, what part of their immigration process they are comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
Again, because it can be traumatic, it can be
Hmm.
something that they may be working on still, or things that they just flat out don't want to talk about. And I respect that 100% because it's their story and I want them to be comfortable sharing however much or however little. So yeah, so when guests like, do share, I'm all for it. And if they don't, I'm all for it too. So a few of the answers that stand out to me is especially when they come as kids. So like,
Yeah.
they come at either elementary school or middle school age. And there's been a few guests who have had incidents with like the bathroom which is
Oh.
crazy because, you know, they either need to go to the bathroom and aren't able to communicate it. So like accidents happen, or there's one particular story where she actually went into the wrong bathroom. She went into the boys' bathroom instead of the woman's bathroom, and she got made fun of, and she ended up like fighting the kids because she was angry that, you know, she was being made fun of. Like, one, she couldn't communicate that she needed to go to the bathroom, and two, she's getting made fun of for just doing a simple mistake of going to the wrong bathroom. So it was like, instead of the kids helping, they were making fun of her. And there was another guest who also came as a child, and I think she grew up in California. I can't remember which neighborhood, but it was, I think they were like one of the only family from whatever country they were from. I can't even remember the country, but what I do remember was that there was a little girl who was bullying her and called her a bad name, and so she called her a bad name back, and they ended up going to the principal's office, and she didn't even know the name that she called the little girl. Like, she didn't had no idea what it was. And so then, you know, she got educated by the principal as to like the history of the word and why we don't use it, and then vice versa. The other little girl also got educated about the word that she was using for my guest. And so just things like that really stand out to me because, again, there's some guests that have like really good experiences, and then there's some guests, you know, obviously, who don't. And whatever they're comfortable with sharing, I want to share, because it really just depends. Not everyone has the same immigration experience. They can have similar things that happen, but it's not, you know, it's not going to be the same. So yeah, those are like the stories that stand out to me.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, when I think about like the stories of, that stick out to me, I think they're all like, even in my own podcast, like when I listen to the stories and the ones that stand out to me, they're all somewhat tied to like my own traumas, right? The things
Oh.
that I remember are the things that, I had dealt with personally. And so I was wondering, like, do, do you think there's a reason that these particular stories stand out to you? Or was it like, does it have something to do with like your own experiences when you were younger? Or do you think that it's just the way, because you're a parent and you have children, right? And so I'm wondering, like, if you know why it was those particular things that stuck out.
Think it has to do a little bit with awe. I remember when I started school here in the United States, I didn't know English. I remember having a translator, and I don't even know if she was a teacher. I think she was like a teacher's aide or someone just
Mhm.
helping out, and she knew Spanish, so she would translate. And I remember I was at school early, and they were trying to give me breakfast, and they were trying to give me orange juice, and I don't like orange juice. And so like I was like I remember like trying to explain that I don't want that. Like, that's
Yeah.
gross. Like, no. So she like had to translate for me and let the other teacher know, like, no, she doesn't like it. So I remember that. I fortunately don't remember if I had any incidents with the bathroom, but I do, like, you know, like little kids drama, like elementary school. Like, I remember there was always like this group of girls who I hung out with, and then sometimes they would like exclude me for like a month or two, and that really hurt. And then they were like, oh, okay, let's be friends again, kind of thing, like, you know how little kids do. So like that stands out. But yes, like as a parent, you know, I live in Florida, so we are very diverse here, and so we have immigrants coming. So I just, you know, try to tell my daughter to be kind, to be nice, if there's anyone that she can help, to
Mm,
help as much as she can. But then I also think like the stories that have stood out to me is just like, I can't, I not that I feel sorry, but it's just like I have that empathy and compassion. It's like, I'm so sorry you went through that. Like, I'm so sorry
mm,
you know, you had to endure that, because it's hard, you know,
yeah.
getting name called and being picked on because you're different. And, you know, like, I really, again, that's why I really try with my daughter, like, to be kind, you know, if you can help someone, help someone. And then, but then I also am like, okay, don't be too kind that you let people walk all over you either, you
Yeah,
know,
right.
kind of thing. But no. So I think that's the reasons why those particular stories stand out to me. Hey, thank you so much for being here and listening week after week to these amazing stories of immigrants and the great things that they are doing for our community and their journeys coming to the United States. I am happy to announce that you can now become an official supporter of the American Dream and the Eyes of Immigrants podcast for just $10 a month. That's right, just $10 a month, and your support will help cover production costs and ensuring that we continue to bring powerful immigration stories to life. And as a thank you for your support, you'll get exclusive access to behind the scenes content. So exclusive content just for paid subscribers, special Q&A sessions with me, your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and bonus insights that I'm bringing to you that you won't hear anywhere else. If this podcast has inspired you, moved you, or made you feel seen, this is your chance to be a part of the growth. Your support will truly make a difference in this podcast. So you can go ahead and sign up now and join our exclusive community on Substack. The link is in the show notes and the show descriptions. And as always, the option to become a sponsor of the show and advertise your business is still available, or you can always make a one-time payment donation to the show. That link is also in the show notes and in the show descriptions. Again, I just want to thank you so much for being a supporter, for listening week after week, and for being here with me in this journey as I am on a mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time.
Oh man, I love that last part. Just like be kind, but not too kind.
Yeah, like,
Like
you got to stand your ground.
yeah, yeah. I got the first message. I never got the second one, which I would have probably
Aw.
appreciated in hindsight. But my mother was the last, so the youngest of a
Ooh.
total of four siblings to immigrate to the United States. So like she always was like I'm her baby and I was her only child, so she was always like be kind, you're gonna be a good girl, so that kind of really resonates. But so my mom, she had some connections because she was the last to immigrate of the family, and some social support along with the help of like my biological father at the time. Um, but because she wasn't like super connected to the Korean church, which is where most Korean immigrants sort of create community, she didn't have a huge social network that she could reach out to or depend on.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, like, what kind of support did your husband, your family, your guests have as they immigrated to the United States?
Yeah. So with my husband's family, they grew up Seventh-day Adventist. So they were very involved in the church. So that was their support.
Hmm.
He tells me stories and literally like I think they went to church like literally every day. And then on Saturdays in particular, he was telling me that they were at church all day from 8 in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. Because his mom was very involved. So she was like a part, leadership and things like that. So they would go to the first service, and then she had to stay for like meetings and stuff, and then there was food. And so since it was already like time for the second service, they will stay for the second service as well. I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot even imagine.
That's a
So
lot of
that was,
church.
yeah, it's a lot of church. So that was their support. That the church was their support in regards to my family. My dad was actually the first to immigrate from he's the oldest of five. So my dad was the first one to
Mm.
immigrate. And then
Oh.
slowly but surely they all came. And so his support was my mom, my biological mom, and her family at first. And then because they first immigrated to New York, and then so that's where I was born. And then they moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And
Mm.
then he moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan because a friend was out there telling him, like, hey, there's a lot of jobs out here.
Mm.
Lower stand or not lower standard of living, but lower cost of living than in New York. So they moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so he had friends, a friend, maybe more than a few, that were out there. So that was their support. And then my grandma immigrated with his two youngest siblings. So then he
Mm.
had them, and then like even my grandma, she had brothers that were out there so like it was like slowly but surely each person would come. And so eventually four out of the of my dad's siblings were all in Michigan, except for I think one of my the middle uncles of mine, they immigrated to Florida directly. Like they were like, nope, we'll skip Michigan. We don't like it out there, so we'll go to Florida. So it was a lot of friends and family support.
Yeah.
And so with my stepmom's family, the same. My stepmom had family that lived out in Michigan as well. So when she immigrated, she had her uncle, like she moved in with her uncle, and she had that family support when she first immigrated. So and then for my guests, it really depends on why they came. Some of them come for school, so like they'll have support for from that. Some of them had church support, and there was a period of time where I actually was asking them like, did they have any non-immigrants help them when they first
Mm.
came, and a lot of them did actually, which I was actually surprised, to be honest. But they did have some people help them out and trying to get like resources and things like that going. One particular person, she moved to Alabama,
Oh,
and she was involved in the church, and she was like, her church really was like embracing her and helping her, making sure that she knew, getting resources and things like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love that for you. I really really love that you had that experience, because not everybody has that. So it really depends again on the reason why they come, where they come to, and if they knew or had family here, because a lot of times they're the first family immigrating.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that I kind of suspected, right, that it's these religious institutions, these churches that are really sort of like the rock for a lot of immigrants because that's where they can practice their culture and their beliefs and, meet people with similar lifestyles and
Yeah.
aligned values. And so, that's an incredible amount of support. So, yeah, thank you for confirming that. But I also think about school, right? Like
Yeah.
how there's a lot of people behind the scenes helping people with the visas and getting situated with residents and things like that. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I was wondering, like, I heard you ask other guests on your podcast what they wish they would have known
Oh yeah.
before they immigrated.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, like, what were some of like the surprising answers you received, or the most memorable?
So I asked that because I know that American influence is big, right? Worldwide, whether it is movies or music videos or TV shows, like for example,
Yeah,
the TV show Friends,
yeah,
very popular, globally. And I actually have had guests tell me like they learn English by watching Friends, or
that's right.
watching TV or whatever. So that's why I had asked those questions. And it's very common for them to realize that like once you move here to the United States, also depending on where you move here, like it's different than what you see on TV and what you see on
Right.
music videos and stuff. Or like books, like if they read certain books, because a lot of the times, the TV shows, right, that are made here, they're usually based in either LA or New York, whether they're not filmed there, but like that's where they live, right?
Yeah.
And so, but there's so many other cities and states and stuff to live here in the United States. So if you move to the Midwest, it's going to be completely different than living in New York or LA, right? So that's one of the things that's very a common answer is like, it's not like how you see on the TV shows. It's a lot harder, a lot more complicated, the system and navigating and things like that. So that's usually the answer that I get.
No, yeah, that's so funny. Um, I think that's a very common show in South Korea that a
Oh,
lot of my
really?
students watch, that they used to watch, and they would ask me things like, "Is it really like this in the States?" And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, Yeah, a lot of that is very like cultural and very New York,
Yeah.
and yeah, and there isn't a lot of diversity in the cast.
Yep.
So it's like,
Yeah.
you're
Yes.
not going to be in those particular situations. You're going to have different
Sis,
situations. Like,
yes. And
so yeah,
also, and the influence, some, because also depends on where the guest came from, because and when, right? Because I had a
right,
guest who came oh well, Czechoslovakia now, but now I can't remember what country it was before, but it was part of the Soviet Union.
right, right.
And so they, like, Western media completely was banned, right? So they
Yeah,
show, when I asked her, she was like, no, I didn't have Western influence, or I didn't have an idea of what it would be like to be in the United States before, because they didn't have access to like radio from the West or magazines or anything. She You can listen to the episode. She talks about how, like, her dad used to sneak
yeah,
a radio station for, I think it was from Europe. And her mom used to be afraid, because if they got caught, it would be bad. But he wanted, to listen to other influences and different things. So that also depends on, like, if they did have access to Western media, because a lot of countries don't.
yeah. I remember listening to that one. I think she came as a nanny, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah, and then I think she works with children with eating disorders now, I think,
Yes.
from
Mhm.
what I remember. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember being fascinated by that episode, particularly the part where you were like, they didn't have that access to media,
Mhm.
right? And so, man, I remember that one. And so I'm curious, like, you okay. So in my guest hosting journey, I've
Mhm.
been asking the hosts, like, what are some of um, the episodes that you feel like are the heartbeat of your whole entire
Ooh.
podcast? And so I was wondering, do you have like top three episodes that you think everybody who first, like listens to your podcast should listen to?
That is so hard, to be honest,
Yeah,
because,
sure.
man, they're I mean, obviously I'm biased, they're all good, right? But it's just like, it's just so different. So for example, there's the or like, I would say, like, the ones that really have impacted me. One was Kelly. She is an immigration attorney. Her episode is talking about how she came from the border from Mexico to the United States through the border. She was 5 years old. Her brother was 7. Her mom sent for them, and they were separated at the border. And I know it, like, as a mom, like, it just breaks my
Right.
heart, but I'm so glad, everything is good. So they got separated at the border, and then they were together when they crossed over in Arizona. And so she went from undocumented to documented to being able to go to a law school, getting her status. And then now she's an attorney. She's an immigration attorney. So she helps other people who were in her position. So her story really stuck out to me, because she went through the whole process. And it's something that, like, it wasn't her fault that she was undocumented. Like, her mom made that decision for her, because she felt at the time that was the best decision, right?
Right.
Like, she was separated from her husband, and so she was then living in poverty. But for her, poverty in the United States is better than poverty in Mexico. See what I'm saying? Like, people have to choose their hard. It's not that it's
Yeah.
easier here, it's just a different type of hard, or a different type of easy. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
yeah, it just, that one really stood out to me. And then the other one, oh, was this man, why Maydeli. Oh my gosh, I can't believe her name was slipping from me. Maydeli also came from Mexico. She came at 6 months, baby, right? Again, a choice that was made for her. And she also went from undocumented to then having DACA to then getting her citizenship. Like, it was crazy, because when we recorded, I record months in advance. And when we recorded, um I had told her when we were done, I was like, hey, by the way, your episode is going to be released February of next year, which is the February of 2024. And then she was like, Oh my God. God is good because I was trying to figure out a way to ask you if you could hold off until February because I am actually going to be a citizen. Like she's going to go, she was like, I'm going to apply next month. And so if I get approved, then my citizenship will come, like the ceremony would come through in February. I know, I got chills too. Actually, I got chills right now. And so
Yeah.
I was like, what perfect timing. I was like, yes, of course. And so her telling me about that, it reminded me of going to my dad's ceremony when he got
Mm,
sworn in to be a citizen. I went with him and I was thinking also about like how important one it is to tell these stories to connect, but then also have someone in, and I'm going off to a whole different topic, but just having someone in leadership where you work that understands your situation, because when I had to go to my dad's ceremony, I had started a new job. I was stepping foot in corporate America, so I was getting used to the system and things like that. And so I was like in my 90 days. So I was like having to go ask my supervisor if I could take that Friday off so I could go to the ceremony because it was 45 minutes away from where I was. And so she was, I think she was second generation as well. So her parents immigrated from India. And so I was telling her, and I was nervous because I was like, I don't know if I can. And so as I'm telling her, I was like, hey, yeah, like I need to have Friday off because my dad's getting sworn in to be a citizen. And she was like, yes, oh my God, yes, that's so exciting. Like I remember when my parents were getting sworn in, it was such a big deal. And girl, I was just like, oh my God, like she gets it. Like she
yeah.
understands, you know? And if it would have been someone who wasn't an immigrant, they wouldn't understand the how big of a deal this actually really was. So it was, so when May Daly was telling me her story, I immediately went to when my dad got sworn in and having to ask and just having that confirmation that it was a big deal. And so her episode then came out in February, and then I did an Instagram live with her so she could share about getting sworn in. And I think in that episode we cried because
Yeah.
just her telling me, like, she really went into details on her story. She shared a lot. And because now she's an advocate now for people who are undocumented and trying to get them a path to citizenship and things like that, because of, again, of what she went through, like helping her parents with the immigration process and everything. So that one is definitely a good episode. And yeah, those are the two really that stand out. um Again, I when I posted about my 2 year anniversary, I posted about like there's been episodes where either we've cried during the recording or I
Yeah.
ended up crying afterwards just because of what they went through, or just like I'm just like in awe of what people go through in this life and survive, and then become stronger and better afterwards. And again, this whole journey has been so incredible, and just speaking with people from literally all over the world has just been such an amazing journey. And honestly, I literally thank God every single day for my podcast and the opportunity to do this.
Oh my gosh, that is so amazing. And I mean, it really, I think it speaks to the fact, I mean, you have listeners in over 80 countries, you
See,
know?
that was crazy to me. That was so crazy to me when I saw that, because I was like, talking about immigration to the United States, I'm like, my target audience is here, the United States, and things like that. And then as I was looking at my analytics, I was like, wait, like there's people listening worldwide. Like this is crazy. So then I did start, because of that, I did ask a few people like, hey, if someone is thinking of moving to the United States, like what advice would you give them? And then I also thought about like what a great resource this podcast is if someone is thinking of moving to the United States, because, you know, years ago, the only resource they had of the United States or influence was the TV shows, or like we were
Yeah.
talking earlier. And that's not realistic. That's a show, that is entertainment. But this
Yeah.
podcast is listening to real people, their real story and journey as to like what it actually means to come to the United States. And one of the big misconception that people have is that it's easy, and it's not at all. It's not.
Yeah. And there are just so many hurdles, right? I mean, not only are the steps challenging, but there are hurdles, there are like systemic obstacles that are not in their favor,
Yep.
and there are a lot of people that don't want them to come.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's absolutely challenging. And so I think it's incredible that you are able to be that resource for these people. Um, and so, I was wondering, like, is there something specific your I think you started off the podcast wanting to hear stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, was there something specific that you were looking to learn? Like a specific story that you were, wanting to hear, or maybe something about your family that you were trying to understand? And then also, conversely, or in addition, in correlation with that, has that changed? And are there stories now that you're looking for, knowing that you are broadcasting to people in over 80 countries?
So no, there wasn't a particular story that I was trying to find. I
Hmm.
am a very curious person by
Yeah.
nature, and I love learning.
Yeah.
So those two things, being able to do this on this podcast, that's why I'm like I absolutely love this. People's stories fascinate me,
Yeah.
especially people who are different from me. And so I wasn't looking for anything in particular when I first started. I was like, my goal is to just highlight these stories. Let's just talk
Yeah.
about the immigration experience. But as I've gotten different stories and as I've continued, again, like I've changed, like, different questions that I ask and things like that, because like I said, like of the analytics or just like the guests that have come on. So but I have learned a lot. I've learned a lot of history. I've learned about different cultures,
Yeah.
and I've learned just like about different countries, like how, because I love asking my guests, like, how was their life prior to the United States? Like, how
Yeah.
was it growing up in your country? Please provide us that education. Please provide us that insight. Um, because a lot of Americans don't even leave the state that they're born in. Like they don't. And so they're very limited to just what they know.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's very, very important for us to expand our horizons, to talk to people who are different than us, to
Yeah.
listen to stories of people who are different from us. But because we can learn, and again, you just learn a lot of things about other countries that make you, again, the United States is not perfect, but makes you appreciate how certain things are here.
Yeah.
So, for example, you mentioned earlier about how a lot of the guests had like very involvement in the church and how they had that support. And I was thinking, it's like, but what a great privilege that we have here in this country, that there are different churches from different
Right.
religions, so people can find their tribe and their community, right? Because if we didn't have that freedom, then it would just be one type of church, and then like, let's say that one type of church wasn't welcome to immigrants, and it's like, it would be a lot harder. But we do have that privilege here where we do have different churches from different religions. Not saying that the church system here is perfect either, but it is something that we have here. So just listening again to like the systems of different countries and how things are is I've been learned a lot. And so that also shapes my questions and just the stories that I've been listening to. And I have guests pitched to me, which is crazy. Like, oh, I want to be on your show. And I'm like, oh my God, you want to be on my show? Like, this is crazy.
That's
So I've
awesome.
had people pitch to me in just like, I mean, I don't turn away guests. Like, I mean, how can I? Right? Like, like if you're an immigrant, you're a child of immigrant, or your grandparents are like I interviewed. She was, I think, fourth or fifth generation. Her
Mm.
episode is going to be released in July, and she created a play. So the play is about Italian immigrants, and so her
Mm.
grandparents came on the boat to Ellis Island, literally 100 years ago. Like I think 2 days after we recorded was the anniversary, the
Oh,
100 year
wow.
anniversary, and she sent me the picture, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So yeah, so I'm like anybody who's involved in immigration attorneys. I even had a little series of like immigration allies, so people who are involved in immigration who are not immigrants themselves. So I'm like, I can't turn away guests because I want it all. Like I want all the experience, and like immigration attorneys can share about like, the cases that they deal with, but then also their own immigration journey, because a lot of immigration attorneys are immigrants themselves, which is
Mm-hmm.
amazing and crazy at the same time. So yeah, so just like as the stories come, I feel like it's definitely has shifted a little bit, but
Yeah.
just like the learning and the information that's out there and just how much you can learn from people and their cultures is just so fascinating to me. So I feel like I could do this for like 100 more years if I God willingly.
My my goodness. So there's someone on the internet that I recently found. His name is Gregor Jeffrey. And I recently came across a clip where he talks about social thinkers. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a social thinker. People who are podcasters, filmmakers, they learn by connecting with others and like learning about their stories and how it's such a three-dimensional type of education. And so I'm wondering, like, you know, I can't imagine you've spoken to over, I mean, at least 50 guests published and so many more, because I know you record like almost a year out. And
Yes.
so, right? And so I'm wondering, like, uh, what are some of those crazy stories, or like the most insightful pieces of wisdom that your guests have imparted with you?
Yeah, I love asking them, one, what does the American dream mean to them at the end? And their answers are always so beautiful because it's so personal.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own definition of what the American dream is. And the common theme is like when they get here or before they come here, they have one, but as they get here, it changes and fluctuates, and it's different. But it's such beautiful answers that they give. But a common word that they use is opportunities. It's just like
Mm,
what how much beautiful opportunity, or what different opportunities that they have here in the United States. And the other thing is so insightful is just, I mean, their stories again is just so incredible, but also some of them just like the hardship that they had to go through to get here.
yeah.
So one story that's standing out to me right now, I don't the her episode is not published yet, but she came from Afghanistan, and then they had to go to Pakistan, and she was saying how like they had to cross the desert for like 4 days. They had to walk on foot. She was a child, and then her dad had to like protect some of the women that were traveling by themselves overnight, because there were people who would like kidnap and things like that. And it just reminded me of all the stories that I hear about people crossing the border from Mexico to the United States. So it's like the border from Mexico to the United States is not the only border people cross, to get to other, or like to flee or get to other countries. So her sharing that insight, I'm really thankful for that. So then people will know it's like it doesn't just happen in the United States. Immigration has happened from the beginning of time, and it's going to continue to happen, unfortunately, because of poverty and wars and natural disasters and just all these unfortunate things that happen. But it's like people need a safe space and place to live, and so those are what really has stood out to me right now. And those, and yeah, it's just there's so much, and and so much more to learn as well.
Yeah. I love when a guest sort of blows my mind. You know, they like share something and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you just like cracked the shell and now I can grow even more
Hmm.
because you've redefined something for me." And so, yeah, that's a really good one. Um and speaking of like my own podcast, I started it because in many ways it was for my daughter to learn how to be a better mom. and figure out like what the most important things are to teach her or prepare her to live up to her potential in the future. And so I know that you're a mom and
Yes.
have at least two children,
Mhm.
from what I've gathered. And I'm wondering, how you see your podcast as a way to become a better mom for them.
For my daughter in particular, it's been like wanting to show her I'm more than a mom and wanting to show her that if you want to have children, if that is in the cards for her, I don't want her to lose herself in motherhood, which I feel like a lot of moms do. And I was modeled more like, okay, once you have children, your children become your life, your whole
Yeah.
world and her thing. And I'm just like, I'm not that mom. I love them to death, but I'm not that mom. And I've grown and been comfortable to share like just and say that to myself. Like when you see on social media, right? I was like, oh, I'm not that mom. That's not that's not me. So for my daughter in particular, it's just showing that example that you can go for your dreams, you can be a mom, a career, have a career and things like that. And I just want her to know that the sky is the limit. Like literally the sky's the limit. And I want to be that support for her for whatever her dreams are. And it's funny because I have videos of her pretending to be me and like be the podcaster. And she's like, I'm Heidy De La Cruz and I am the host. It's so funny. Like she's so funny. So for my daughter is that. And then for my son, I don't know. I mean, he's so young. He's 2, so I don't know how this will impact him or anything like that. But again, I also want him to go for his dreams and reach for the stars and whatever, whatever it is that he has, I want to support him. I do eventually would like, for the podcast slash business that I have to be able to fund whatever
Mm.
extracurricular activities they want to do when they're older and things like that. So like my daughter right now is involved in dance and she loves ballet. And so she has talked about, getting into competitive dance and, it's a lot of money and resources and things like that. So I'm like, my podcast and business, I would love for that to be able to fund extracurricular activities for my kids, whatever it is that they want to pursue.
Oh, that's so sweet. And so, yeah, you have built courses, you've built a community, and lots of other services around your podcast.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, what is next for you? Is there a big wish or ask you want to make to the universe?
Yes. So, oh my gosh, I have so many ideas for my podcast and I've told a few people. So I've put it out there and I'm going to continue to put it out there. And I'm a firm believer, faith is a big thing in my life. So I'm always like, God, Lord, if it's in your will, you'll make a way. So I have a few dreams. So I love food and I love trying new food. So I was like, it would be amazing if I could go to my guest house or rent a house or something and they will cook their traditional meal from their home country and then talk about like what it means to them, what it is, and the history of it. And then as we sit down enjoying this traditional meal from their country, they tell me their immigration story. So I was like, oh, that would be such a great like either addition to this podcast or like a show, whatever. I definitely want to do that. I've also thought about like a documentary sharing immigrant stories, but in particular like restaurants, because a lot of immigrants come and they open restaurants and things like
Yeah.
that. So kind of like go that avenue as well. Again, food. I love food. So like going to the restaurants, talking about like how they open, how why and things like that, and talk about their journey and the food. And then also, I thought about writing a book. So I have a poetry book that I self-published 2 years ago now. So I want to publish actually two more books, a memoir, but in particular with this podcast, I want to publish an immigration book, which talks. I want to dive deep into the history of immigration of the United States. So I want to, from the very beginning, laws and policies that were passed and why they were passed, like what was going on in the particular world or in the country that drove this policy or law to be passed and how it impacted the people. And then in between that, like share immigrant stories. So, for example, I had in the very beginning, I had three sisters who came from Mexico in the 1980s. And I can't remember the law right now, but there was a particular law that was passed, and they were able to get citizenship through that law. So like that affected them. So it's like, oh, that would be a good story to share again in the book and in regards to that law. But different things like that. So I really want to write that book. So I definitely have to like set time apart to like do the research and talk to people, interview more people and things like that. So those are my big dreams for my little podcast.
Oh my gosh, those are amazing dreams, and I
Thank
feel
you.
like you're going to make them happen.
Oh,
Just
thank
your
you.
energy, your diligence, your organization, your heart is in the right place. I know this is going to happen for you. And I love food too. My husband and I were foodies for a long time. Right now, things have changed because we're still kind of newish parents, but I love that idea, and I think so many people are going to, respond to that. Hopefully you can, yeah, produce that.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And as we wind up or wrap up here, I wanted to ask you if you have any dream guests, either specific people or people from certain demographics or origin country, or even like particular struggles that you'd like to have on your podcast or be part of these future projects in the future.
It's so funny that you asked that because I was like, I would love to interview like Sofia Vergara or Jay Shetty or, those famous immigrants that like made a way. I would love to interview them. And then like I'll see like people either we're watching TV or a movie or something, and then I realize like, oh, they're immigrant. I can interview them for my podcast. So, like any big name immigrants, I would love to be able to interview. Like even America Ferrer, like her,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Like I would just love Eva Mendes. Oh man, like just even though like even if they're born here, but their parents, came. Like we still have such a unique perspective. Which actually that didn't happen until I was asked actually by two sisters, because I was speaking at a women's event. I was the guest speaker because of the podcast actually, and so I was talking about it, and so like afterwards they were like, are you interested or would you be willing to interview us? Like we weren't born in Mexico, but our parents were, and so they were telling me how they grew up. Her mom had a boutique, so they helped the mom at the shop translate and things like that at like the age of like 5 and 6, right? And then the dad worked at a farm. I can't remember which farm, but like they would go out in the summers and help pick fruit and stuff. And so because of them, I actually expanded to like, oh yeah, the children of immigrants, like that would be a good perspective to share. Because again, when I initially started, I was like, immigrants, like, oh, what is your journey to get here and things like that. But then, when they were telling their experience, I was like, man, that's a lot like mine, like having to translate and help my parents and things like that. So I was like, yeah. So that's how like actually that came about, like the children of immigrants perspective. Someone they asked me. So that was a really interesting thing. So yeah, I'm definitely open to like expanding. I again I don't think I could ever turn down a guest. Like if they're involved in immigration in any way, like yeah, of course, let's share your experience. So yeah, but famous any famous immigrants that's out there, let's talk.
That's amazing. And, I just, based on the things that I've heard you say and, listening to how you treat your guests and how you think and all of the momentum that you have in just the way that you present yourself, I know that these things are going to happen for you.
Thank
And,
you.
I think the space that you create for people to share their stories is really necessary, and you're doing the social work. I feel like, I think social worker is a protected title, but honestly, I feel like, you're doing that. You're doing
Thank
social
you.
work.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
yeah, I hope you continue and all of those projects come to fruition. And I so appreciate you letting me guest host for you. I loved listening to your story, and I can't wait to see what's next for you.
Oh, thank you so much, Ray, for this. Oh.